Archibishop Desmond Tutu, His Excellency the Governor, and dear friends. Welcome to the 7th J.R.D. Tata Memorial Lecture. We'd like to start by welcoming our guests with some flowers. To His Grace, the Archbishop. To Dr. Devaki Jain. I'd like to now request the Director of NIAS, Dr. Kasturi Rangan, to make his welcoming remarks.
Your Excellency, the Governor of Karnataka, Sri T.N. Chadurvedi, the Most Reverend His Grace, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Srimati Devaki Jain, all associates of NIAS, distinguished guests, invitees, ladies and gentlemen. It's with a deep sense of pride that I welcome all of you to this J.R.D. Tata Memorial Lecture being organized by the National Institute of Advanced Studies. Born out of the vision of Bharat Ratna, the late Sri J.R.D. Tata, this pioneering institution of higher learning was launched by the founder himself at Pune on January 16, 1989. The institute, in his vision, would bring together exceptionally gifted men and women from different streams of national life, from both the government and non-governmental sectors, for a better understanding of each other's interrelated tasks and problems, and for assisting them in developing the best means to deal with their respective roles. NIAS, under the distinguished leadership of its founder director, late Professor Raja Ramanna, and subsequently under the equally distinguished Professor Rodam Narasimha, has scaled great heights in terms of excellence and creativity in research, particularly on multidisciplinary areas. The organization of several courses and seminars undertaking projects of social relevance such as gender studies and education, as well as carrying out multidisciplinary research encompassing the disciplines of natural sciences, social sciences and humanities, have made this institute a truly unique one of its kind. As a part of paying our own humble tribute to Sri J.R.D. Tata, the Institute management decided to hold lectures in his memory on the eve of his birth centenary year. Today, we have none other than one of the most distinguished citizens of the contemporary world, the Most Reverend His Grace Archbishop Desmond Tutu, to deliver this memorial lecture. Revered Sir, your clear standpoints and your fearless attitude have made your name a unifying symbol for all groups of freedom campaigners, not only in Africa, but all across the world. You have shown that to campaign for the cause of peace is not a question of silent acceptance, but rather of arousing consciousness and a sense of indignation, strengthening the will and inspiring the human spirit so that it recognizes both its own value and its power of victory. Besides the above observations of the Nobel Committee, the presentation speech at the Nobel Peace Prize Award ceremony makes the following extraordinary statement about His Grace the Archbishop, and I quote, "The contribution he has made and is still making represents a hope for the future, for the country's white minority as well as the black majority. Desmond Tutu is an exponent of the only form of conflict resolving which is worthy of civilized nations," and I unquote. We are indeed grateful to you, sir, for kindly accepting our invitation. As always, this talk of yours, "Is there a hope for humanity?" is sure to send a powerful message across the nations of the world, many of which are in dire need of such wisdom and guidance to deal with conflict-ridden societies. We welcome you, sir, to India, the land of Buddha and Mahatma Gandhi, and to this beautiful city of Bangalore. We also have today His Excellency, the Governor of Karnataka, Sri T. N. Chadurvedi ji, who as always brings to bear his extraordinary level of erudition and scholarship to any role he plays. Because of this, His Excellency has often been drawn to the various activities of NIAS. We welcome you, sir, for this function and thank you for sparing your valuable time and also being a friend of NIAS. This event is made possible thanks to the interest and efforts of Srimati Devaki Jain and Dr. Lakshmi Jain. Over the last 1 year, they have been in touch with His Grace and successfully persuaded him to undertake this visit to Bangalore. I would like to thank you, Srimati Devaki Jain, for this and the resultant opportunity to organize this important event as a part of the NIAS centenary celebrations in honor of Bharat Ratna Sri J.R.D. Tata. I use this opportunity to recall with gratitude our dear Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh Ji's gesture of facilitating this visit of His Grace by declaring him as a state guest and asking the Indian Council of Cultural Relations to host this visit. And finally, I have the proud privilege to welcome each and every one of you. In fact, I do see in this crowd a number of people, Dr. Arkat Ramachandran, Professor U.R. Rao, Professor Sarsit Desai, Justice Bopanna, and many others, and among the audience. It's also my great pleasure to welcome our esteemed associates and also our dear colleagues of NIAS. Welcome to all the members of the media. Once again, I would welcome all of you to this unique function. Thank you.
I now call upon His Excellency, the Governor, to make his presidential remarks.
Reverend Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Dr. Kasturi Rangan, Honorable Member of Parliament and the Director of NIAS, Dr. Srimati Devaki Jain, Dr. Ahuja, and other colleagues from NIAS, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen. A year ago, in August 2004, NIAS began a series of lectures to commemorate the birth centenary of its founder, Sri J.R.D. Tata. The lectures were so selected as to highlight matters that were of great concern to Sri Tata. These include science and higher education, steel making and aviation in India, his concerns about population growth, interface between the citizen and the government, freedom of the individual, and so on. Last time I was here and we had the President of India who delivered a lecture on JRD's vision for aeronautical missions. Today, we are very fortunate in having this 7th and the last lecture in the series being delivered by Reverend Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And we are indeed delighted to have him in our midst. Ladies and gentlemen, we could not have had a more distinguished and apt speaker than the Archbishop to speak to us on the theme, Is There Future of Humanity? Originally trained as a school teacher, then as the theologian, he rose to become the Bishop of Lesotho and then Johannesburg and subsequently the Archbishop of Cape Town. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize even before his remarkable and extraordinary contribution that he made with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came before the public eyes, where at times, despite hostile criticism from his own countrymen, while always a stickler for finding out the truth, the Archbishop stood unflinchingly for forgiveness and reconciliation. It would only be appropriate to say a few words about NIAS, though Dr. Kasturi Rangan has already mentioned some of the leading the lights, so far as the evolution of this institute is concerned. The ambience of this institute, the seriousness of purpose and professionalism with which it undertakes its varied activities are admirable. As Bertrand Russell said, that knowledge is like a seamless cloth. So does the scholars at NIAS believe that nothing of relevance and concern to man and society is alien to it, and hence this multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approach. It has a broad, all-encompassing and holistic view of the different branches and disciplines of knowledge so as to harmonize them and harness them for the good of man and society. For this, credit goes to its successive directors, the late Dr. Ramanna, Dr. Narasimha, Dr. Kasturi Rangan. I am glad that the government of Karnataka has supported this institute from its inception and continues both to support it and participate in its activities. Shri J.R.D. Tata's multifarious contribution to this country are widely known. His role in supporting the formation of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research and the National Institute of Advanced Studies, which owes its very inception, as all of you are aware, to his visionary enthusiasm and his consistent support for the Indian Institute of Science, in whose campus we meet today, is comparatively less known. Sri J.R.D. Tata was all along concerned about the state of almost everything in our country, its development and progress in all directions. He was concerned about the realization of the need for the maximization and optimization of the total resources, human and material, the country is endowed with. His sights were focused particularly on excellence, endeavor, and ethics. Occasionally, towards the end of his life, he felt perplexed that a country that gave the world Mahatma Gandhi should be in the same century that he lived, could get so engulfed by violence. At a public meeting in Bombay in 1991, he said, and I quote, "To me it seems a strange thing, indeed, that a country like ours, which almost invented non-violence, not only invented it, but actually created it in the birth of great religions dedicated to non-violence, in the teachings of Gautam Buddha, Mahavir, and the Hindu religion itself, such as it is, and ending with Mahatma Gandhi, that such a country should be ravaged by violence," unquote. This was the expression of his heart's agony. And if I have the Reverend Archbishop's permission to quote the title of Alan Patton's book, "Cry the Beloved Country." He was sometimes misunderstood, but he was not to be influenced by the likely favors or the frowns of the powers that be. He was not swayed by the exigencies of the moment or fleeting changes of public opinion. He, however, was not one to despair or to be deterred. He often said that he was a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist. A cultured man of high principles, J.R.D. had unwavering faith in his people and the future of the country. A man of action all through life, he was above all a thoughtful citizen. Ladies and gentlemen, may I, in all humility, venture to suggest that J.R.D. shared and appreciated many of the qualities of head and heart with which the eminent speaker of this evening, his sensitivity, his humanism, his imaginative sympathy, his spirituality, his activism or action-mindedness, his selflessness, his global outlook, and his indefatigable optimism. It is only in the fitness of the occasion that the concluding or the final lecture dedicated to the memory of J.R.D., a memory which we cherish by a world statesman like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who represents the triumph of human spirit and whom we highly regard and pray for his long and healthy life. I am happy to be here and look forward to an insightful and inspiring talk. May I thank Dr. Kasturi Rangan and his colleagues as well for giving me this wonderful opportunity to thank you. Thank you all. Jai Bharat, Jai Karnataka.
Thank you, sir. I now call upon Dr. Devaki Jain to introduce His Grace the Archbishop.
Friends, how to introduce Archbishop Desmond Tutu, a person of such eminence and so widely visible in public knowledge? The Archbishop's best introduction, I suggest, to himself comes from himself when we hear him speak, which I'm sure you're all longing to hear. And you have heard so much about his background that I will only take a minute of your time. So all I can say is that South Africa's struggle against apartheid has revealed the extraordinary capacity of us humans, as we see in the living examples of a Nelson Mandela and the Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Gandhiji said, "My life is my message." Indeed, for these two men, I suggest their life is their message. To be able to remove the oppressor and yet live with him, as the black South Africans are living with their former oppressors, required the truthfulness and spirituality of an exemplary human being, someone who could enable victims to forgive their oppressor, oppressors to ask for forgiveness. An attempt that our speaker here today made at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in all humility and with infinite compassion, which I was privileged to witness in South Africa itself. Whatever may be its inadequacies, and subsequent commentaries have tried to point out, witnessing those moments and hours were to see the full potential of human beings. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission celebrates its 10th anniversary this week, and we wish it and the Archbishop many happy returns of the day and much rejoicing. We have often heard Archbishop Desmond Tutu's famous axioms: there can be no peace without forgiveness, there can be no reconciliation without truth. But what you may not know, which I just found out, is that he is now very active in global governance and initiatives for peace. I've just found out that he's a member of a new high-powered group which has been set up by the Secretary General with a very interesting mission. It says, Alliance of Civilizations, as a counter to Huntington's, you know what it is, that is Clash of Civilizations. So this is an attempt to counter Huntington and say Alliance of Civilizations, and when he described the membership, it was scintillating, and we wish him great success in getting back the Alliance of Civilizations and not the clash. He also is now serving on a special fund that has been created to, enable the victims of various forms of conflict and oppression. And therefore, I want to mention that he is right now very active in 2 or 3 UN agencies, again in his usual role of building peace. We welcome him, and we wish him success in these efforts to bring back humanity to human beings. I welcome you, Desmond Tutu, our brother.
Thank you. The Archbishop.
I came too soon. Your Excellency and other excellencies, the directors of the Institute and faculty, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and young people, it is such a great honor and privilege to have been asked to be part of the series of lectures commemorating a great son of the soil, and to be able to do so in the precincts of an institute he founded. Thank you so very, very much for this very wonderful honor and privilege bestowed on me. I also would want to say a very big thank you on behalf of our people. Thank you to the people of India for your outstanding contribution to our struggle against apartheid. India was the first country to bring apartheid onto the agenda of the United Nations and therefore of the international community. And you know, as they say, the rest is history. For here we are, a free and democratic country, and you here made a telling contribution to that struggle. On behalf of millions and millions and millions of my compatriots, I would like to say thank you. Now, at this point, I usually say that I wish I could clap you. No. I'm not, no, wait a bit. I discovered long ago that you are actually very shy people. And I found out that I have a magic wand. When I wave it over people, lo and behold, it turns them into instant South Africans. So I wave this wand over you and able to say, fellow South Africans, let's give these Indians a rousing applause. You still do it as if you were in India. I have transported you to South Africa. Come on, like South Africans now, come on. It's a slight improvement. But thank you. Oh, yes, I have to wave my wand. And I wave my wand over you, and you revert to your normal, shy Indian selves. But that may be half facetious. I want you to know that it is heartfelt. We were inspired more than you can ever know by Mahatma Gandhi. As you know, he spent some of his professional life as a lawyer in South Africa and suffered the indignity of being thrown off a train. And that was, as it were, the beginning of his satyagraha. And we have imbibed some of that. And we want to say to you, thank you. Thank you, Devaki, for your introduction. Thank you. You are beautiful. Yeah. This is just to make Lakshmi a little jealous. I also want to say thank you to the Indian Council for Cultural Relations. They've been very good to us. The staff in Mumbai did everything that you could want when you are visiting a country for the first time. And then we came here, and Mr. Lobo and his colleagues have been wonderful in caring for us. And we spent the first few days here being spoiled and pampered in Sukiya. And they've been giving us all wonderful kinds of massage, and we're really feeling good. Thank you for that. But I want to say an even more heartfelt thank you for giving so many of our young people the opportunity to come to your country to study. We cannot thank you enough for that. And I learned that very soon you are going to be hosting another of our wonderful South Africans, Ahmad Kathrada. He spent, as you will have heard and you will hear, he spent 26 years on Robben Island. But I want to tell you a little story about him. In South Africa, in the bad old days, they used to have all kinds of road signs. And there was a road sign that said, "Drive carefully. Natives," meaning ourselves, "natives cross here." And Ahmad and some of the others used to go around at night to change these signs. And so one day people are driving, and then they read a sign that says, "Drive carefully. Natives very cross here." It is wonderful, therefore, and thank you very much. I sometimes have had people introduce me, and Devaki did a nice little job. They introduce you and they say, "Oh no, he doesn't need to be introduced, he's very well known." The other day now I'm not name dropping, but the other day I was in Washington, D.C. at a function with Ashley Judd. They were raising funds for AIDS. Now, on the following morning, I was sitting in the foyer of the hotel, minding my own business as I always do. And I was dolled out like an archbishop, a purple shirt, big pectoral cross, dark suit, and I thought I looked fairly, well, sort of impressive. And then one of the staff of the hotel comes along to me and he says, "We've been getting so many phone calls about the actress." And I say, "Yes. I think she's up in her room." And this guy says to me, "Well, we are not allowed to go." "You are her driver, aren't you?" Yes. It has become a cliche that the 20th century was one of the most violent in living memory. That is saying quite a mouthful when one has regard for how past centuries have been read in tooth and claw, when people were burnt at the stake on suspicion of being witches, and those who were regarded as heretics and mavericks who bugged whatever system held sway in that particular status quo, who refused to toe the line, rocking the boat of the prevailing orthodoxy. Such were given short shrift, imprisoned, scourged, drawn and quartered. Those past centuries were indeed gory. But though many, many thousands were killed, those figures pale into insignificance in contrast to what we managed to do with such brutal efficiency. The numbers get to be mind-boggling. There have been 2 so-called world wars. In the Holocaust in Germany alone, 6 million men, women, and children were done to death simply because they were either Jewish or homosexual or gypsies. Previous centuries did not have at their disposal the devastating power of weapons of mass destruction. The 20th century saw a civilized Christian nation unleash the horrific death-dealing power of the atom bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, killing over 80,000 civilians at one fell swoop. Many survivors are still suffering from the after effects of radiation 60 years after August the 6th, 1945. It has seemed as if we want to prove the cynic right who declared, "We learn from history," that we do not learn from history. World War II happened only 20 years after World War I. We have demonstrated, it appears, the incapacity to learn from our mistakes, repeating them almost with gay abandon. And so the Holocaust in Germany was followed by the so-called ethnic cleansing in the former Yugoslavia. The atrocities committed during that bloody chapter in the Balkans almost defy description. Women raped as a deliberate weapon of war, many being carelessly infected with the HIV/AIDS virus, family members mown down in front of their relatives, and were now being appalled by the mass graves being uncovered. It just seems as if there are no depths to which we cannot sink in our depravity and inhumanity to one another. There have been episodes such as the Armenian genocide and the ghastlinesses that happened during the Rwandan genocide. But the catalogue does not end there. We learned during the processes of the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission that we have a remarkable capacity, all of us, to commit some of the most gruesome atrocities. For you see, the perpetrators did not have horns or tails. They were seemingly ordinary human beings who, to all intents and purposes, behaved like most of us. The banality of evil indeed. And we have not mentioned the many regional or intra-conflicts, those happening within nations. We know what happened after India gained her independence, which led to the partition that spawned Pakistan and Bangladesh, fueled by sectarian disagreement between Hindus and Muslims, and which is still simmering today with an uneasy truce between the two major nations. We know of the awful things
that have happened between Indonesia and East Timor, and in the civil war in Sri Lanka. And then there has been the conflict in the Middle East and the strife between Roman Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland. And you might want to say, tell us only about the countries that are not in turmoil in Africa. Don't tell us about Algeria, Burundi, Liberia, Sierra Leone, the DRC, Sudan, Angola, Zimbabwe, etc., etc., etc. Please don't tell us about the turmoil in Latin America. And then there has been the scourge in so many lands of the HIV/AIDS pandemic, which is mowing down huge sections of the population, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. We had hoped that the end of the Cold War would usher in a period of peace, stability, and prosperity for all. We felt a euphoria when the nations of the world adopted the Millennium Development Goals, so idealistic and yet apparently achievable. But it has all been shattered by the immoral invasion by the United States with her satellites, Britain and others, of Iraq, for the spurious reason that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. When this turned out to be a lie, the invaders scrambled to find other excuses, and so they concocted the notion of a beneficial regime change. What would happen if countries decided there had to be a regime change in their enemy's territory? Would we not have monumental global chaos? A new century that had promised much began with a horrendous, totally unnecessary war, which has left Iraq in a shambles. The first post-Saddam Hussein Prime Minister, Mr. Alawi, has declared that human rights violations in the so-called liberated Iraq are as bad as in the days of Saddam, if not worse. And there is the blot on the world's only superpower's image of the abuse of prisoners at Abu Ghraib and the erosion of the rule of law represented by Guantanamo Bay. I never thought I would live to see the day when I would hear the rulers of the United States and Great Britain use exactly the same argument for the use of detention without trial that the apartheid government employed, and that there should be so little outcry in the lands that we thought were paragons of democratic values. Today, the world seems a great deal less secure and far more violent than before September the 11th and its aftermath. Now, there is a war against terrorism, and some use the unfortunate paradigm of the West versus the Muslim world, and we glibly speak of Muslim or Islamic terrorism. I am not aware that anyone ever described the IRA or the Protestant paramilitaries in Northern Ireland as Christian terrorists. And the world is now as polarized as it ever was during the Cold War period, and the tensions are growing. So, is there hope for humankind in this dolorous situation? The stark reality. There is no doubt that the situation is fraught. There are riots in Manchester and Birmingham and in France. And at their heart is the frustration of an underclass, of those who have been left behind, the poor, the marginalized, the voiceless, who almost always are people of color. It was revealed so starkly that there were gross inequalities in some of the most affluent nations. Hurricane Katrina revealed that this was so in the United States. Yes, we cannot pretend that it is otherwise. What is the case in many nations is replicated globally. There is a chasm between the haves and the have-nots, and that gap between the rich and the poor is widening. There is poverty and disease and ignorance abroad in the global south, as there is plenty and affluence and prosperity and good health in the global north. But just as the riots in France and the United Kingdom demonstrate, those inequalities will spawn instability. No, not will spawn, but are already causing instability and turmoil. So we should heed the warning lights flashing. There is no way, in my view, that we will win the war against terror as long as there are conditions in so many parts of the world that make people desperate. People want to know and feel that they matter. And in the world of big business and the G7, they know that on the whole, they count for very little. They are very small beer indeed. They are of little account. They feel humiliated and sidelined. And that can't be good for the world. The eradication of poverty and disease and ignorance by those with the means to do so is not altruism. No, it is the best form of self-interest. We can be free only together. We can be secure only together. We can be prosperous only together. Yes, there are without doubt many horrendous things happening and that have taken place. But is that the whole picture? When we were involved in the TRC in South Africa, we were often devastated by the gory details of the gruesome atrocities perpetrators revealed. We gave him drugged coffee. We shot him in the head. We burned his body. And it takes 7-8 hours for a human body to burn. And whilst the body was burning here, we were having a barbecue here and drinking beer. And you see, what could have happened to the humanity of those who could have these two different kinds of barbecue? Animal flesh here, human flesh there. It revealed that we have this capacity, all of us, for committing great evil. But that was not the whole picture. That was not even the most important part of the picture. For you see, we were exhilarated when we discovered that it wasn't, in fact, the whole story. When we witnessed those who had suffered grievously, not consumed by bitterness, not paying for the blood of their tormentors, Oh, dear friends, it was so wonderful to witness the magnanimity of victims as they offered forgiveness and not retribution. The teenage daughter of one of those who were called the Craddock Four, ANC activists who were gruesomely burned to death in their car by, we discovered later, by the security forces. She came to a TRC hearing, actually the very first we had, and we said, is forgiveness possible in this situation? And you could hear a pin drop in a hall that was jam-packed to the roof. As she said quietly, this teenager, yes, we want to forgive. We just want to know whom to forgive. Yes, it said, we wonderfully also had this remarkable capacity for good. We realized afresh that indeed we inhabit a moral universe, that good and evil, right and wrong, that these matter, that there is no way that injustice and oppression, lies and evil could ever have the last word. We have seen just how the perpetrators of wrong have strutted on the stage of the world, seemingly invincible and oh so cocky. And then, as sure as anything, they would bite the dust comprehensively and become the flotsam and jetsam of history. Where are Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, Franco, Amin, Bukasa, Verwoerd, Malan, P.W. Botha, and myriads of others of their ilk? They have become mainly footnotes to history. It is a different world today from the one where women and children and the weak and vulnerable were treated carelessly, abused, and regarded as non-entities. Today, the lot of women and children, of people with disability, has improved beyond recognition. Of course, there is much, very, very much still to be done. But the point I want to make is that no one can now blatantly declare that he abuses women or children, or that he violates human rights. Isn't it funny that even the worst dictatorships will give out that they respect and promote human rights? There is near zero tolerance for impunity. The world community has established the International Criminal Court precisely in order to deal with gross violations of human rights if the particular country has ignored or is unable to have done so. You and I and most normal human beings are shocked when we see evil happening, and we're even more appalled if it goes unpunished. And we are distressed to witness suffering on a huge scale, as for instance that caused by natural disaster and war. Witness the amazing outpouring of compassion and sympathy for those who are victims of man-made or natural disasters. There was such an outpouring for the people of the United States after September the 11th. a wave of sympathy, unfortunately, that they dissipated wantonly and quickly when they behaved so badly in their desire for revenge. Witness the amazing sympathy for those hit by the tsunami disaster and Hurricane Katrina. It seems odd that we should care so much about evil and wrong and disaster, if it was not that we believe we know that these cannot be the norm. Wrong and evil can't be the norm. They are aberrations. The norm is the good, the just, the beautiful, the right. Even in hard-nosed, cynical cultures, it is amazing that those we admire, indeed revere, are not the macho, are not the aggressive, are not the highly successful. No, the people we hold almost universally in high regard are such as Mahatma Gandhi, the Dalai Lama, Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr. And why? Because they are good. We have internal antennae which home in on goodness. Because you see, you and I are created for goodness. We are created for love. We are created for gentleness. We are created for compassion and sharing. We are almost the ultimate paradox. We are the finite created for the infinite. St. Augustine of Hippo said, "Thou, God, hast created us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee." We are created by God. We are created to be like God. And we are created for God. We each have a God hunger, which only God can satisfy. And they say, we each have a God-shaped space, which only God can fill. Don't the Upanishads in Hinduism declare about the human soul that it is ultimately divine? That tuam asi, that thou art the divine. One day, a farmer was looking at his backyard, and there were chickens in the backyard. But there was a strange looking chicken. It looked like the other chickens, but not quite. And the farmer said, "Yeah, well, that's a strange looking chicken." And then somebody came along who knew about these things and said to the farmer, "No, man, that's not a chicken. That's an eagle." And the farmer said, "Ah." And then the traveler said, "Please give me that strange looking chicken." And so he took the strange looking chicken and he went up a mountain top and he waited for the sun to rise. And then he pointed this strange looking chicken to the rising sun and said, "Fly, eagle, fly." And the strange looking chicken shook itself, spread out its pinions, and took off. And it soared and soared and soared, and it flew and disappeared against the rising sun. And you know something? God says to us, hey, you are no chicken. You are an eagle. And God says to us, fly, eagle, fly. And God expects us to shake ourselves, to spread out our pinions, and then to take off and to soar and to soar. For you see, we are made for transcendence. We are made for beauty. We are made for love. We are made for compassion and gentleness and caring. And God wants us to soar, to disappear towards the rising sun. For we are no chicken. Fly, eagle, fly. Thank you. When a moment of silent communion would have been preferable, I have a duty to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of all of you. First and foremost, we are grateful to His Grace for His theophanic presence and to have delivered this J.R.D. Tata Memorial Lecture. We thank Dr. Devaki Jain for inviting the Archbishop and persuading him to come to Bangalore. We also thank Mr. Pavan Verma of the Indian Council of Cultural Relations for making the Archbishop's visit possible. We are thankful to His Excellency the Governor for his presidential remarks. We greatly appreciate his scholarly participation at many NIAS events. When Rabindranath Tagore welcomed Gandhiji to Shantiniketan 65 years ago, he gave us this formula: homage to the great naturally seeks its manifestation in the language of simplicity. I will therefore avoid extravagant phrases and merely tell the Archbishop how honored we are by his presence. As long as you are with us, sir, there will be hope for humankind. Finally, thank you all for coming and being here this evening. May I request you to join me in giving the Archbishop a standing but South African ovation. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Some copies, printed copies of the speech are available for all of you who are interested. Please.
Lecture was given by our President, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. So we came to basically trying to get your grace for this talk, which I'm sure is of interest not only to Bangalore but to what's more important is Grace is a very interesting institute.
Yes.
This institute has most of the research scholars and other faculty members. So over the years we have been trying to create some kind of a holistic approach. We see in the context of
ಅದನ್ನು ಹೋಟ್ಲಲ್ಲಿ ಬಿಟ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಗೆಲ್ತ ಭಯ ಆಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದೆ ನನಗೆ. ನಾನು ಕಾಲು ಕೂತ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದ
that include also the science and mathematics into it. The vision of JRD Tata was that he took the decision making to bring to bear a broader and holistic knowledge. Difficult. So that's why
and it's mathematics,
physics, biology, agriculture, education, gender studies, philosophy around the world.
I believe
very, very well.
So, yes, outstanding people, and it's still doing.
Maintain the civilian character of the program and making it more and more relevant to the country's development. That is one thing in which there is no parallel to India's space program.
That's right.
Today, the components of the space capability of this country reaches the remotest corner of villages in the country. And it gets into looking at the groundwater, watershed development, giving them the knowledge about the latest in terms of developmental communication, health, hygiene, agricultural practices, environment, and so on. The best of the teachers who are specialists teach from one location, and this is interactively conveyed to the folks in the rural areas. They even ask them very intelligent questions. It's a wonderful system that we have created over the years. So
the water resources,
right.
And being able to predict what the possibilities are of drought and water levels and so on. I mean, we are, I think, beginning to face the possibilities of very serious water shortage. And I think, I mean, that your program would be very, very appropriate. But I'm very impressed to hear about how it has been, as it was civilian pushed, and not part of the red race.
Absolutely.
Yes, yes.
We are I am Kasturi Rangan. I just want to welcome all the members of the media to this press interaction. This is Grace, the Most Reverend Archibishop Desmond Tutu. His Grace is here in India in connection with certain programs, one of which is going to be today, which is related to the JRD Tata's Bus Centenary celebrations being organized by the National Institute for Advanced Studies, which is just across on the other side. And so His Grace will be talking, he's going to be a speaker of the JRD Tata Memorial Centenary celebration today evening. And also we have the privilege of the presence of His Grace in a roundtable discussion with the Sangama Srinivasan Foundation. Is organizing day after tomorrow. So in the connection with both these programs, we have been privileged to get His Grace, Most Reverend Archibishop Desmond Tutu to India. This is an effort of 1 year before we could have him in this country. They have been most gracious in accepting our invitation and be with us. I'm sure your interaction would be very interesting with His Grace. And so without standing between you and His Grace, Most Reverend Archbishop, I leave the floor for the interaction. But before the interaction, if His Grace, Most Reverend Archbishop would like to say a few words as introductory remarks.
They've already got their questions which they want to throw at you and think you are wasting a lot of time. But I do want to say one or two things. One is that it is a very great honor to have been invited to give this Tata Memorial Lecture. And in this institute which he helped to found, and to be able to maybe speak about someone who embodied what the host, the host council, the Indian Council for Cultural Relations represents, which is to reach out to different nations, peoples, and cultures, and especially at this time in the history of the world when there is so much tension and hostility. We thought, that the Cold War ending would usher in a period of stability and so on, but it has turned out differently. And so I just want to say that I am very greatly honored to have come, and also to say that we have been wonderfully well looked after. We've been pampered ever since we came. The staff of the Indian Council were very gracious in meeting us in Mumbai, and the director has been wonderful in chaperoning me to make sure I behave myself, and has been around with me, and I just want to pay a warm tribute to him and to the staff of the Indian Council. There we are. I don't know, it's over to you.
I'd just like to ask you the first question, is begin the proceedings. Just very general, what is your appraisal of South Africa and Africa as a whole today?
What is the what?
What is your appraisal?
What is my appraisal?
Of South Africa?
Wonderful word, appraisal. Yes. Yes, this would get me to imagine that I was preaching, and I might not stop. I'll sit down when, thank you very much, I'll sit down when I think I'm exhausted. I think South Africa extraordinarily has become a beacon of hope for the world. That is something no one expected when you think of pre-1990 days, that the last thing you would have thought about South Africa was that it would one day become a sign of hope for many parts of the world which are hag-ridden by conflict. And even more, I think, importantly, is the fact that South Africa has shown that it is possible for enemies to become friends, because one had expected that once you had a black-led government, you would have an orgy of revenge against white people, but that has not happened. Instead, you had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And yeah, Africa, yes?
Africa.
Yes, Africa. Sometimes when I get a little annoyed with Western arrogance, I say to them, you ought to be a little more modest, because you produced 2 world wars, one after the other. You were responsible for the Holocaust. And oh, by the way, where did communism fascism, Nazism come from. They were all produced by Western countries. And you say, you forget very quickly how gory, how bloody your history has been. And that in this last century, you've had very many military dictatorships in Europe, which have had a very long period in which to evolve. That I mean, even the home of democracy, Greece, had a military dictatorship, and there was a time when you couldn't. If I asked you who is the government of Italy, you didn't know. I mean, very few people would know because they were changing their governments like people change pairs of socks. I mean, they were just. I mean, it was like a revolving door. So I say, yeah, remember that. But then also remember just how Western nations encouraged, supported some of the worst dictatorships in the world. In the Philippines, they supported the Contras in Nicaragua, and in Africa, they aided and abetted people like Mobutu, Savimbi in Angola, and they didn't care about their human rights records, and we are paying the price of all that. But having said that, I think we also have to be honest and say Africa has also suffered a great deal from corrupt leaders. There's no question about that. That many of the leaders are people who thought that you are a leader for your people. And the most recent is Zimbabwe. You know, I mean, President Mugabe, who used to be someone we held in very high regard. I mean, he was one of our best people, and we showed off with him. I don't know what happened there, but certainly what is happening in Zimbabwe is a huge disgrace. It's a huge disgrace and a huge blot on the copybook of Africa. We have huge problems that result from the inequity of this global economic system. But I have to say too, I mean, yes, that if our leaders were people like Julius Nyerere, you know, Nelson Mandela, we would, even with all of the problems that we had, perhaps done a far better job. But we can also say we are the continent that has produced the world's, I mean, everybody acknowledges that the most respected, the most admired statesperson comes from Africa. You mustn't encourage.
Okay, I'd just like to take you back to something you just said about how South Africa has shown that you can forgive and enemies can become friends.
Yes.
But truth and reconciliation has never been applied anywhere other than South Africa.
No, that's not entirely true. In fact, we copied what had happened already in places like Chile, Argentina, and it is very important, I mean, that we don't make out that we invented Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We learned from the achievements and the mistakes of others. We have certain, one of the most important new features about our Truth and Reconciliation Commission was the fact that you could give amnesty to perpetrators. That was a strength, but it was also a weakness in that we could not at the same time give victims reparation. We could only recommend to the government, and that was a very big weakness of our commission, which tended to make people say it was really perpetrator friendly. But we hope, I mean, that people will have seen that human beings are actually remarkable in the fact that they can be so magnanimous.
Don't you think global terrorism has overtaken all peace initiatives?
I beg your pardon?
Global terrorism has overtaken peace initiatives.
But I think sometimes that we like slick characterizations of the world, you know, like terrorism. But you know, when you know that there are things like poverty, like disease, and the inequalities that you have in the world, what is surprising is not the fact of the emergence of so-called terrorism. It is why it has taken so long. You know, because when there is an English expression which you would know, that even the worm turns. There comes a time when even the most humble, the most peaceful, peace-loving person says, I've had enough. And I think we've got to be careful that we are not, I was going to say, media-driven. You see, one of the which I'm going to say in the lecture is the fact that we are making out that there is the West over here, and there's terrorism that comes from Muslims. See, we say Islamic, Muslim. We've got that particular paradigm, and we are trying to make out that it is a bipolar problem. It isn't. It's really multipolar. That a lot of people everywhere in the world feel humiliated, feel powerless, feel they are non-entities, they don't amount to anything. And my own view is that we won't win the war against terror as long as there are conditions which are the root cause conditions that make people feel desperate.
Why is it not got reflected in Africa itself? Africa, there's not much of terrorism. Why is it not touched Africa that way? Like terrorism as such, it's happened in other parts of the world, not as much in Africa.
Well, it has. You know that things have happened in
not
Kenya.
Not on such a large scale elsewhere.
Yeah, but
Tanzania.
very few parts of the world remain unaffected. And the fact of the matter is, that I'm also going to say this in the lecture, that inequalities in of themselves generate instability. Now, if you say, that's a very, very sweeping statement, the examples are very straightforward. Just look at what's happening in France today. You say, why is it happening there? Why is it happening in Britain? And clearly, it is that inequality, poverty, affluence are in and of themselves generators of instability. Now, as a theologian, I would say God keeps trying to teach us a lesson. The lesson that God is trying to teach us is, for goodness sake, remember you are family. Now you'll say, well, that sounds very sentimental. It's not sentimental. If we were to accept that we are family, we realize that there is the ethic of family. And the ethic of family is never, in a good family, you never say, you are going to eat only in proportion to what you contribute to the family budget. What does the baby contribute? And in a good family, you see, even the old, the granny, they don't contribute, but you lavish on the baby. The baby, what does it produce? Sometimes it produces bad smells and so forth. But you lavish a great deal of love on it, because the ethic of family is from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. If we were to accept that we are family, really, not figuratively, existentially, ontologically, that of our very being, we are family, how would you drop bombs on your family? How would you spend the amounts of money that we spend on so-called defense when we know that a very, very small fraction of that would enable everybody in the world to eat, to have clean water to drink? We're crazy.
I have a question. In the contemporary world,
That's the last question. Last question. So, please.
in the contemporary world, why is religion such a weak instrument of peace?
Because religion is carried by its adherents, and they just happen to be human beings. I try to remind people that something that we all know, that religion in and of itself is neither good nor bad. It's morally neutral. If I say to you, you are a religious person, I'm not necessarily praising you. And the example that I use is religion is like a knife. When it sits there on the table, it is neither good nor bad. If I take it and I cut bread for sandwiches, it is good. If I take it and I stick it into your guts, it is bad. Religion is the same. Religion has produced some of the world's most outstanding people. The Dalai Lama, Mahatma, Mother Teresa. But it's also produced some of the world's most awful creatures. In America, there's something called the Ku Klux Klan. You know, the Ku Klux Klan has as its symbol a cross, flaming cross. And what do? They lynch people. They blow up homes in the name of religion. In Northern Ireland, Christians on this side are fighting Christians on the other side. And it is exacerbated by the fact that these are Protestants and these others are Roman Catholics. So religion can be a good thing when it turns people, as it does, turns people into compassionate, caring, loving people who are selfless in their service of others. But it can also turn people into some of the most ghastly creatures that you could ever imagine. So religion is there, available for us to use so that it can turn us into those who work for peace, who work for justice. In South Africa, in our struggle against apartheid, many, not everyone, but a huge majority of those who led the struggle against apartheid were religious leaders: Christians, Muslims, Hindu, Jews. And they were inspired by their faith. But then apartheid was also inspired by the faith.
My last question is Africa. I mean, the issue of preventing HIV from spreading in Africa is subject to a major debate, especially in places like Uganda, where Republican policies dictating something like abstaining from sex. Right? You have always championed that. I mean, even though you are a Archbishop, you always said that condom use is the way to go forward in prevention of HIV. So, what's their stand? I mean.
But you have told me what my stand is.
Okay. No, I mean, you comment on the Republican policy. I mean,
I would just myself say I am sad. Almost everybody who works in the HIV/AIDS area would say unprotected sex is signing your own death warrant.
Thank you very much. And we will have, of course, more opportunity to hear His Grace.